I stood in the courtroom with the bright lights beating down on me and the weight of 100 eyes pressing into my skin. The scar on my abdomen still ached beneath my modest navy dress, and I could feel every stitch of pain like it was stitched into my memory. The air was thick with anticipation. Reporters lined the benches, their pens scratching cameras, waiting for one slip, one flicker of weakness from me. Across the room, my parents sat together, calm, collected, utterly certain that they were in the right. My father's jaw was set in stone, his gray hair combed neatly as if appearance could mask cruelty. My mother clutched a tissue in her hand, dabbing at eyes that were dry, her performance as rehearsed as a stage actress. Beside them, my sister Clara looked pale but self-satisfied, the chosen one, the one for whom I had been sacrificed. The judge asked if I had anything to say. I rose, my hands trembling not from fear, but from rage held down too long. My voice cut through the heavy silence. My parents knocked me out and stole my kidney for my sister. Gasps filled the chamber. The sound echoed like a wave crashing against the walls of justice itself. The words tasted like blood and steel. I wanted the world to know. I wanted them to hear the truth in all its ugliness. I wanted to strip away the last of their mask. My name is Rachel Morgan. I am 26 years old. I am not a criminal. I am not a rebel without cause. I am a teacher, a musician, a woman who once believed that family meant safety. And yet I stand here branded by scars that prove otherwise. Today is not about money. Today is not about inheritance or pride. Today is about betrayal carved into flesh. Today is about justice. I looked at my parents again. My father's lips curled upward in a sneer as if daring me to continue. My mother's face was ice. She truly believed her decision was righteous. She believed I was born for sacrifice. Clara shifted uncomfortably, but her eyes avoided mine. She had always been the jewel of the family. I had always been the shadow. Now the shadow was speaking. The spectators leaned forward, hungry for every detail. Some shook their heads in disbelief. Others whispered furiously, glancing at my parents like they were monsters pulled straight from some ancient tale. The judge, a woman in her 60s with stern eyes that had seen countless tragedies unfold, raised a hand for quiet. The courtroom hushed again, but the tension remained alive and pulsing like a storm ready to break. I clutched my side for a moment, feeling the phantom throb of the organ that was no longer there. I remembered the night it happened, the sharp betrayal disguised as care, the bitter taste of drugged wine. I remembered the cold awakening, the sterile white of the hospital room, and the emptiness inside me where life had been stolen. My parents had called it love. They had called it duty. But I called it what it was: violence, theft, cruelty. My father cleared his throat and muttered loud enough for the microphones to catch. "She is lying. We saved one daughter with the gift of another." His words slithered through the room. My mother nodded, adding softly, "She should be proud her sister lives." That was the dagger, the belief that my pain was nothing, that my choice did not exist, that I was only a vessel. I straightened, eyes fixed on the bench where the judge sat. But today, justice will make them kneel. There was no need to shout. My voice carried because it was heavy with truth. A reporter dropped a pen. A murmur rose again like thunder rolling across a valley. My parents still sat upright, convinced that their control could not be broken. They thought I was still the silent daughter, the obedient child, the one who swallowed hurt without sound. They had not yet understood that scars speak louder than silence. I closed my eyes for one moment and let myself breathe. In that breath came flashes of everything I had lost. Years of piano practice stripped away so Clara could have her room. My favorite books taken and handed to her because she asked. My father's words, sharp as whips, branding me selfish whenever I wanted something for myself. My mother's endless comparisons that reduced me to nothing more than a shadow. All of it poured into this single moment. When I opened my eyes again, I was steel. I was the storm. I was the truth, standing unshaken in the face of denial. This is not just my case. This is not just my wound. This is a story of every daughter who has been told she is less. This is a story of every woman whose body was treated as property, This is about the justice they thought I would never demand. The judge leaned forward, studying me carefully, perhaps measuring the weight of what I had just declared. She nodded once, slow and deliberate, a sign that my words were heard. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of something rare: hope. My parents whispered frantically with their attorney, their confidence faltering. My father's hands gripped the table hard enough that his knuckles blanched. My mother dabbed her tissue again, but this time her hands trembled. Clara bit her lip. I caught her glance, and for one heartbeat she looked almost guilty. Almost. But then she turned away back into the shelter of their control. I knew what was coming. They would paint me as hysterical. They would call me bitter. They would spin my truth into lies. But I also knew that evidence does not tremble. Witnesses do not forget, and scars do not vanish. The fight was only beginning, but the first blow had been mine. And it had landed. My name is Rachel Morgan, and I am 26 years old. Before all of this, before the courtrooms and the scars and the endless nights of pain, I was simply a teacher who loved music. I taught piano to children at a small community center, and in the evenings I played quietly for myself, letting the notes ease the stress of the day. I lived alone in a modest apartment filled with secondhand furniture and the warmth of independence. I had worked hard for that independence because my childhood home had never been a place of peace. It had been a place where favoritism thrived, like a poisonous vine wrapping tighter around my life until I could barely breathe. My father, Edward Morgan, was a man who demanded obedience above all else. He spoke like every word was law, and in our house it was. He had worked as a construction foreman, and he carried that same harsh discipline into every conversation. My mother, Linda, was softer on the surface, but only on the surface. Behind her gentle tone was an iron loyalty to my father's rules, and more painfully, a devotion to my sister Clara that eclipsed any affection she could have shown me. Clara was 2 years older, 28 now, and from the moment she was born, she became the jewel of the family. My earliest memories were not of family vacations or bedtime stories, but of comparisons. Clara plays the violin so gracefully, Rachel. Why can't you be more like her? Clara has such beautiful hair. Rachel, yours is too plain. Clara needs quiet for her studies. Rachel, so you will give up your piano practice. Every decision, every sacrifice, every cut came from the assumption that Clara's needs outweighed mine. As children, we shared a room until Clara declared that she needed space for her instruments and her clothes. I was told to move my bed into the corner of the basement. The excuse was that Clara deserved comfort because she was the elder. I remember lying awake at night listening to the thud of footsteps above me, my hands pressed to my ears to block out the sense of being buried alive in my own house. School was my escape, and music was my lifeline. My piano teacher told me once that I had a gift, that when I played, it was as though the keys became an extension of my soul. Those words sustained me through the long years of being overlooked. But my parents never came to recitals. They were always too busy with Clara's performances, Clara's competitions, Clara's illnesses. Because Clara was often sickly even as a child, every cough, every fever drew endless attention. Meanwhile, when I broke my wrist falling from a swing, my father scolded me for being careless, and my mother handed me ice and told me to stop crying. By the time I reached high school, I had already learned that my worth was conditional. If I kept quiet, if I obeyed, if I gave up what I loved, I was tolerated. If I spoke out, I was punished. Once, when I refused to let Clara take my jacket because she had ruined hers, my father slapped me across the face so hard my ears rang. The lesson was clear. Resistance brought pain. Still, a stubborn part of me kept fighting. I applied for scholarships. I studied late into the night. I dreamed of getting out. When I was accepted into a university hours away, I packed my things with trembling hands and left that house without looking back. For 4 years, I breathed freedom. I discovered who I was when I was not standing in Clara's shadow. I studied music education. I worked part-time jobs, and for the first time, people saw me, for me. I was not someone's lesser half. I was simply Rachel. But family ties, no matter how toxic, have a way of reaching back. Clara's health began to decline after college. Her kidneys were failing. My parents called me again and again, each message laced with guilt. Rachel, Your sister needs you. Rachel. You are the only match. Rachel, you will do this because family comes first. At first, I ignored them. Then the calls turned into visits. My father showed up at my apartment door, looming and demanding. My mother clutched my arm and whispered about duty and love. And Clara, my sister, looked at me with eyes that held both desperation and disdain. She said I should be honored to save her life. I resisted. I said no. I told them I would not give away a piece of my body against my will. I said I would help find other solutions. Explore the transplant list fundraise if necessary, but my answer was still no. That was when the masks began to slip. My father called me selfish, ungrateful, worthless. My mother cried as though I had already condemned Clara to death, and Clara spat words that burned deeper than any wound. She said I had always been jealous that my life meant less than hers, that the family would be better if I simply disappeared. It was not just about the kidney. It was about a lifetime of being told I did not matter crystallized into one horrifying demand. To them, I was a spare part, not a daughter. I was a vessel to be used, not a life to be cherished. I felt the walls of my past closing in again, pressing me back into the role I thought I had escaped. Yet, even in that storm of pressure, there was a flicker of defiance. I remembered the girl who had played piano with fire in her veins. I remembered the young woman who had worked to build a life on her own. I told them no again. My father's face turned red with rage. My mother collapsed into sobs. Clara hissed that I was pathetic. I walked away that night with my head high, but my heart pounding with fear. Because when you deny people who are used to controlling you, their retaliation can be brutal. And it was. Looking back, I sometimes wonder how I managed to carry the weight of that childhood without breaking sooner. The truth is that survival becomes a habit, and habits harden into walls. By the time I was a teenager, I had already built walls around my heart walls that kept me from hoping too much, walls that kept me from expecting love from my parents. Music was my only window, the one thing that allowed me to imagine a life larger than the basement room where they pushed me. But even music was not safe from their control. I remember the day clearly when I was 14. I had been practicing piano for hours preparing for a regional competition. Clara stormed into the living room with tears in her eyes, claiming she needed peace and quiet for her violin practice. My mother's face hardened, and she turned to me with that familiar sharpness. "Rachel, stop this noise. Clara needs the room." I begged, pleaded for just one more hour, but my father's hand came down like a hammer. "Enough, Rachel. Clara's future matters more." That was the night they carried my piano into the garage and told me I could practice there if I wanted, as if damp concrete and oil stains could inspire harmony. I cried silently into the keys, feeling like even my passion had been stolen. It was around this time that the comparisons sharpened into open favoritism. Clara's achievements were celebrated with parties' photographs and glowing words. My small victories were either ignored or twisted into failures. If I got an A on a paper, my father would remind me that Clara had gotten an award for excellence the year before. If I dressed up for a school dance, my mother would sigh and say Clara had always been prettier at that age. The message was relentless. You are second. You will always be second. By the time I was 16, resentment had turned into a quiet resolve. I focused all my energy on grades, scholarships, and the dream of leaving. I pushed my emotions down because emotions were ammunition in that house. I learned to smile at teachers, to show kindness to classmates, to become the version of myself that no one at home would ever recognize. I wanted the world to see me, even if my family never would. College was liberation. Stepping onto that campus felt like stepping into sunlight after years underground. I studied music education, threw myself into rehearsals, joined ensembles, and felt for the first time what it meant to belong. Friends praised my talent. Professors encouraged me. I rented a small off-campus apartment and filled it with secondhand books and sheet music. There finally I was not a shadow. I was Rachel, whole and alive. It was during these years that I also fell in love. His name was Michael. He was a fellow student studying architecture with gentle eyes and a patience I had never known. He listened when I spoke, not dismissing, not comparing. He came to my recitals clapping the loudest and told me my music carried pieces of my soul. For a while, I believed in a future with him. For a while, I believed love could heal what family had broken. But my family has always had a way of poisoning what I cherished. During my junior year, Clara came to visit. She had been struggling with her health, complaining about exhaustion, about the endless doctor appointments. At first, I tried to be supportive. Despite everything, she was still my sister. I took her to classes with me, introduced her to Michael, showed her the campus. She smiled sweetly at him, too sweetly, and something inside me tightened. I told myself not to be paranoid. I told myself she was just being friendly. It was not until weeks later that I discovered the truth. Michael grew distant, evasive. He skipped dates, forgot promises. When I confronted him, he admitted with shame that Clara had kissed him one evening after a dinner. He claimed he pulled away, that it meant nothing but the damage was done. When I confronted Clara, her response was cruel laughter. "You thought he loved you more than me. No one ever does." That moment burned into my chest. Betrayal from a sister is one thing. Betrayal from both sister and boyfriend is a wound that lingers. I ended the relationship, cut ties, and poured myself deeper into my studies. That betrayal should have taught me that Clara would always take what she wanted and my parents would always justify it. When I told them what had happened, expecting at least a flicker of sympathy, my father shrugged. "Boys make mistakes." My mother chided me for being dramatic. And Clara, standing in the doorway, smirked as though she had won some invisible battle. Graduating college felt like an escape plan realized. I walked across the stage, diploma in hand, and I told myself I would never go back to the chains of that house. I got a job at a community center, started teaching children, and built a small but meaningful life. For a time, I believed I was free. For a time, I believed the past would stay buried. But Clara's illness returned with a vengeance. Her kidneys were failing, and suddenly, my phone was filled with calls from my parents. At first, they used guilt. "Rachel, you have a duty to your sister. Rachel, she is suffering. Do not be selfish." When guilt did not work, they shifted to manipulation. "Your sister has always been there for you." They claimed as though stealing my boyfriend counted as loyalty. When I still refused, they turned to anger. My father's voice thundered through the phone, calling me a disgrace. My mother wept dramatically, claiming I was killing Clara by doing nothing. For months, I stood firm. I researched transplant lists offered to help raise funds, suggested medical trials, but none of that mattered. In their eyes, the only acceptable solution was me. I began to sense the walls of my old life pressing in again, and fear coiled in my stomach. Because I knew my parents, I knew how far they were willing to go, and I knew that saying no to them was never the end. It was only the beginning of a war. The calls did not stop. If anything, they grew more insistent, sharper with every passing week. At first, it was my mother, her voice syrupy with practiced sorrow. "Rachel, your sister is wasting away. How can you just sit there and let it happen?" Then came my father, his tone hard as stone. "You will do what is necessary because this family demands it." Clara herself joined in, leaving voicemails dripping with scorn. "You are useless if you cannot even help your own blood." I ignored them as long as I could, but the pressure was relentless. They began showing up at my apartment, pounding on the door, shouting through the thin walls until neighbors threatened to call the police. My father stood outside once for nearly an hour, his voice booming. "Rachel, this is not a choice. This is your duty." I remember sitting on the floor with my hands over my ears, tears sliding down my cheeks, every word clawing into my skin like barbed wire. The day came when they cornered me in person. It was a Sunday afternoon. I had just finished teaching a group lesson and was packing sheet music into my bag when I turned and saw them at the doorway. Edward stood tall, filling the frame, Linda clutching her purse with eyes red from forced tears, and Clara leaning on the wall with her arms folded. My heart lurched. I wanted to turn and run, but Edward stepped forward, blocking the exit. "We need you to sign these papers," he said, thrusting a folder at me. I glanced down and saw the words, "Consent for living donor transplant," glaring in bold letters. My stomach twisted. I pushed the folder back. "No," I said, firm, though my voice trembled. "It is my body, my choice." That phrase lit a fuse. Edward's face flushed crimson, his jaw clenched, and his voice roared through the empty hall. "Selfish girl! We fed you, raised you, and this is how you repay us!" Linda clutched my arm, her grip surprisingly strong. "If you loved your family, you would sacrifice." Clara snorted behind her, her lips curling into a cruel smile. "I deserve this more than you ever will. I am worth saving." The words hit like blows. I felt small again, a child cowering beneath their shadow. Yet beneath the fear, anger burned hot. I yanked my arm free and took a step back. "I will not sign. I will not give up a part of myself because you demand it." Edward's eyes narrowed. "You think you have power here. You think you can defy me." His voice dropped to a low growl that made my skin crawl. "You will regret this, Rachel. You will regret making us desperate." The threat lingered long after they left. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and sat in the dark, trying to steady my breathing. I wanted to believe it was empty rage that they would accept my refusal eventually. But I knew them too well. Desperation mixed with entitlement is a dangerous brew. Over the next few weeks, the manipulation deepened. My mother began sending letters written in shaky handwriting filled with words meant to pierce my heart. "If Clara dies, her blood will be on your hands." I would find them slipped under my door, tucked into my mailbox, even shoved through the crack beneath my window. Clara sent me photographs from the hospital, her face pale and eyes hollow, captioned with messages like, "This could be your fault." The worst was when my father approached my workplace. He walked into the community center one evening, towering over the receptionist, demanding to see me. When I came out, he grabbed my shoulder with bruising force and hissed in my ear, "You are going to do this whether you want to or not." I tore myself away, my heart racing, and told him to leave. But the seed of terror had been planted. I began glancing over my shoulder on the walk home. I double-checked locks. I stopped answering unknown numbers. It was Evelyn, my closest friend, who first said aloud what I feared in silence. "They might not wait for your consent. They might take it from you." Her words chilled me. I laughed nervously, trying to dismiss the thought, but deep down, I knew she was right. I had seen the look in my father's eyes. I had heard the bitterness in Clara's voice. I had felt the suffocating weight of my mother's guilt. The conflict escalated to its peak one stormy evening. I had just returned home, soaked from the rain, when the lights flickered. A knock rattled the door. My heart hammered. I peered through the peephole and froze. It was them again. Edward, his frame blocking the dim light, Linda behind him clutching an umbrella, and Clara looking fragile but defiant. I did not answer, but his voice thundered through the wood. "Rachel, open this door. Do not make me break it down." I stayed silent, pressing my back against the wall, praying they would leave. After what felt like an eternity, footsteps retreated. Relief washed over me, but it was hollow. I knew this was not over. Every refusal only made them more determined. Every act of defiance pushed them closer to crossing a line that could not be uncrossed. The walls of my independence began to feel less like safety and more like a cage. I called Patricia, the lawyer I had once consulted for advice on protecting assets. I asked about medical rights, about what protection I had against forced procedures. She reassured me that without my written consent, no hospital could perform a transplant. But as I hung up, unease lingered. Consent could be forged. Records could be tampered. And desperation, when coupled with authority, can silence 100 laws. In the mirror that night, I studied my reflection. Dark circles beneath my eyes, shoulders tense with constant fear. I whispered to myself that I would stand firm, that I would not break. Yet a part of me trembled with the knowledge that storms break even the strongest walls when they rage long enough. The night it happened began like any other. I had stayed late at the community center, tidying up sheet music after the children had gone home, my fingers lingering on the piano keys as though music could shield me from the gathering storm. Outside, rain tapped against the windows in steady rhythm. I packed my bag, locked the door, and stepped into the damp evening air. I had no idea that by the time I opened my eyes again, my life would be carved open and stolen. When I arrived at my apartment building, the hallway lights flickered. The air smelled faintly of disinfectant, too sharp, like something foreign had seeped into the familiar. My stomach knotted. I walked cautiously to my door, unlocked it, and stepped inside. Everything looked normal, too. Normal. My books on the shelf, my sheet music on the table, the faint scent of lavender from the candle I had left burning earlier. But there was an undercurrent of wrongness, a silence too thick, a stillness too heavy. I remember pouring a glass of water sitting at the kitchen counter, trying to shake off the paranoia that clung to me. My phone buzzed with a message from Evelyn asking if I had made it home safe. I typed a quick reply, assuring her I was fine. Minutes later, there was a knock at the door. Sharp, heavy, deliberate. My heart seized. It was my parents. I froze, every instinct screaming not to answer, but before I could act, the door swung open. Edward stepped in, his eyes dark, his frame looming. Behind him, Linda slipped inside, her face pale but determined. Clara leaned against the doorframe, her cheeks hollow, her breathing shallow, but her eyes glittered with something cruel. "What are you doing here?" I demanded, my voice cracking. "You cannot just barge into my home." Edward held up a bottle of wine, his lips twisting into a mockery of a smile. "A peace offering," he said. "Let us talk, Rachel. Just one glass." I should have thrown them out right then. I should have run. But exhaustion and years of conditioning made me hesitate. They had never come offering peace before. Against my better judgment, I let them set the bottle on the table. Linda poured the glasses, her hands steady, her eyes never leaving mine. "Drink, Rachel. We need to have a family conversation." The first sip burned bitter, sharper than it should have. I coughed, setting the glass down, suspicion flaring. "What did you put in this?" My voice sounded distant, muffled, like I was shouting through water. The room swayed. My hands grew heavy. Edward's face blurred into shadow. Linda's voice floated calm and cold. "It is for the best. One day you will understand." Darkness swallowed me whole. I woke to blinding light. My mouth was dry, my body heavy, my abdomen screaming with pain. Beeping machines surrounded me. Sterile white walls closed in. I tried to move, but my limbs felt anchored. Panic surged as realization dawned. Something was missing. A part of me was gone. My side was bandaged, the ache deep and raw. My breath hitched. They had done it. They had taken my kidney. The door creaked open, and in walked my parents. Edward's shoulders were squared with grim satisfaction. Linda's face was serene, as though she had just completed a holy ritual. Clara followed her steps slow, her complexion still pale, but her lips curved faintly upward. "It is done," Edward announced. "You should be proud. Your sister lives because of you." I stared at him, my voice caught between a scream and a whisper. "You drugged me. You stole from me." Linda tilted her head, her tone almost gentle. "We saved Clara. You should be grateful you had something to give." Clara's eyes met mine, not with gratitude, not with relief, but with smug victory. She whispered, "I told you I was worth more." The room spun with rage and grief. My heart pounded, every beat screaming betrayal. I pressed my hand to my bandaged side, tears stinging my eyes. My body was not theirs to carve. My life was not theirs to decide, but they stood there unrepentant, convinced they had done the right thing. Hours passed in a haze of pain and fury. Nurses moved around me, checking vitals, adjusting machines, their faces carefully neutral. I wanted to scream at them, to demand how they allowed this, but my voice was weak, my strength drained. I realized then how alone I truly was. My parents had orchestrated everything, manipulating paperwork, pushing through with forged consent. My body had become their battlefield, and I had lost a war I never agreed to fight. When Evelyn arrived at the hospital, her eyes widened at the sight of me. She rushed to my side, her hands trembling as she brushed my hair back. "Rachel, what happened?" I choked on the words, trying to explain between gasps of pain. "They drugged me. They took my kidney." Evelyn's face hardened with horror and fury. She turned to the nurse at the doorway. "How could you let this happen?" But the nurse lowered her gaze, muttering about signatures and approvals. Evelyn grabbed my hand. "We will fight this, Rachel. They cannot get away with it." Lying there, I felt the weight of every betrayal pressing down on me. My father's threats, my mother's manipulations, my sister's cruelty, they had culminated in this violation. They had stolen from me not just an organ, but a sense of safety, of autonomy. I thought of every time they had told me I was less, every time they had chosen Clara over me. Now they had chosen her life over mine in the most literal way. As the days passed, recovery was agony. Every step pulled at the stitches, every movement reminded me of what I had lost. My parents visited once more, their words hollow. Edward spoke of duty, Linda of family bonds, Clara of gratitude she did not mean. I told them to leave. My voice was hoarse but steady. "You will answer for this." They looked at me with pity, as if I were the one who had lost reason. Edward muttered, "You will thank us one day." Then they left, the click of the door echoing like final judgment. In the silence that followed, I made a vow. They had stolen from me, but they had not silenced me. They had tried to turn me into nothing more than a vessel, but I would rise scarred but unbroken. For the first time in my life, I would fight back not with silence or submission, but with truth and justice. The days after my release from the hospital were some of the darkest of my life. I moved slowly, each step tugging at the stitches in my side, each breath reminding me of what had been taken. The scar burned like a cruel signature carved by hands that should have protected me. I could not bring myself to return to my apartment, that place where betrayal had been poured into a glass of wine. Instead, I accepted Evelyn's offer to stay in her small guest room. She welcomed me with blankets, tea, and silence, the kind of silence that heals instead of suffocates. At night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment. The bottle of wine on the table, my father's steady glare, my mother's calm cruelty, Clara's triumphant smirk. The memory pressed against me like a weight I could not lift. Yet in the quiet hours, fury began to seep into the cracks of despair. They thought they had broken me, but with every painful breath, I felt something new stirring, a determination stronger than fear. Evelyn sat with me one morning at the kitchen table, her eyes sharp and steady. "You cannot let this go, Rachel. If you stay silent, they will believe they were right." Her words cut through the fog. I nodded, though my hands trembled. "I want justice," I whispered. "I want the truth to be known." The first step was to seek legal help. Evelyn recommended Patricia Hall, a lawyer known in Nashville for handling complex cases of medical malpractice and family disputes. Patricia welcomed us into her office, a space lined with thick books and diplomas, the air carrying the scent of leather and determination. She listened carefully as I recounted everything: the years of favoritism, the pressure to donate, the threats the night of the wine, the hospital bed. Her eyes narrowed, her pen scribbling notes in swift strokes. "This is not only a civil case," she said firmly. "This is criminal. Assault. Fraud. Violation of medical consent." Hearing those words gave me a strange kind of relief. For so long I had been told I was dramatic, selfish lesser. Now someone was labeling their actions for what they truly were: crimes. Patricia laid out the plan. We would gather medical records, secure witness testimony, and prepare to expose the forged consent forms. She assured me that no hospital in Tennessee could legally perform such a surgery without paperwork, and that meant someone had lied, someone had helped them. We would find out who. I left her office with a binder full of tasks and a spark of hope. For the first time, the path forward did not feel like a maze of fear. It felt like a battlefield where I had allies. Still, preparing for resistance was not easy. The physical pain was constant. Some mornings I struggled even to stand my side, throbbing with every movement. Yet Evelyn was always there, coaxing me to walk a little farther, to eat a little more, to rest, when nightmares kept me awake. She reminded me that healing was its own kind of rebellion. I began keeping a journal at Patricia's suggestion. Write down every memory, every detail she told me. Dates, times, words, threats. The act of writing became both torture and therapy. I filled pages with the sound of my father's voice thundering through walls, with the image of my mother's hand gripping mine like iron, with the sting of Clara's words that my life was worth less. Each entry was like pulling poison from a wound. Evelyn supported me with a quiet strength that I will never forget. She cooked meals, drove me to appointments, and most importantly, believed me without question. One evening, as I sat on the porch, staring into the dusk, she placed a hand on my shoulder. "You have always been stronger than them," she said softly. "They tried to erase you, but you are still here. That means you already won the first battle." As weeks passed, Patricia uncovered crucial evidence. The hospital had received a signed consent form supposedly from me, but the signature was a shaky imitation nothing like my handwriting. Worse, the notary listed on the document was an acquaintance of my father's from his construction firm, a man who owed him favors. Patricia's lips tightened as she showed me the file. "This is forgery, Rachel. This is the nail in their coffin." The discovery ignited something fierce inside me. They had not only taken my kidney, they had lied, manipulated, and corrupted the very system meant to protect me. I felt my fear shrinking, replaced by anger sharp enough to cut. Meanwhile, the community began whispering. News traveled fast in Nashville. A young woman drugged by her own parents for a transplant, that kind of story spread like wildfire. Some neighbors expressed disbelief, unwilling to imagine Edward and Linda capable of such cruelty. Others approached Evelyn quietly, offering support, recounting how they had overheard shouting matches, how they had seen my father storming from my apartment, how my mother's voice carried accusations through thin walls. Slowly, a circle of witnesses formed, people willing to speak when the time came. One neighbor, Mrs. Thompson, an elderly woman with keen eyes, recalled hearing Edward's voice one evening saying, "She will drink it. She will not resist." The words chilled me, but they also strengthened the case. The more I learned, the clearer it became that my parents believed they were untouchable. They had lived in a world where their rules reigned, where Clara's needs excused any cruelty. They thought I was still that basement girl too afraid to fight. They had underestimated me. Each meeting with Patricia became a rehearsal for war. She prepared me for the courtroom, for the tactics they would use to paint me as unstable, ungrateful, dramatic. She coached me on speaking clearly, on holding steady when they shouted lies. "You must show them who you are now, not the girl they tried to break," she said. "You must show them you are unshakable." As the court date loomed, my nights grew restless. I dreamed of the hospital bed, of the scar tearing open, of Clara laughing as I bled. But I woke each morning with resolve burning hotter. They would not win. Not this time. I began to play piano again slowly at first, my fingers stumbling over keys. But the music returned stronger, fiercer, carrying echoes of pain and defiance. When I played, I felt whole again, even if part of me was gone. Evelyn would sit nearby, listening, her eyes glistening. That she whispered one night is the sound of survival. By the time the summons arrived, I was ready. My scar was still tender, my body still healing, but my spirit had been forged into steel. I gathered my journal, the forged documents, the testimonies, and the fury of a lifetime. They had taken my kidney, but they would not take my voice. This time, when I faced them, I would not tremble. I would not beg. I would not yield. The day I filed the lawsuit, the sky was overcast, heavy with the threat of rain. Evelyn drove me to the courthouse, her hands tight on the steering wheel, as though she could hold back the storm that was coming. I sat beside her with Patricia's binder on my lap, my fingers brushing the edges of the pages. Inside was my story, every scar and betrayal turned into evidence, every memory sharpened into testimony. My parents had stolen from me in the shadows, but now the fight would happen in the open, where truth had a chance to breathe. Filing the case felt surreal. The clerk accepted the papers with a nod, stamped them, and slid them back into the stack of endless bureaucracy. It was an ordinary gesture, yet to me it felt like the sound of chains breaking. For the first time, I had forced the system to look at what had been done to me. Patricia squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "This is the first step. From here, they cannot silence you." Word spread quickly. Within days, whispers rippled through the neighborhood, then the city. Headlines appeared in local papers: "Daughter sues parents over forced organ donation." Some articles treated it like a scandal, others like a tragedy, but all of them painted me as the woman who dared to fight her own family. At the grocery store, I caught people staring, their eyes darting away when I turned. Some looked at me with pity, others with disbelief, and a few with admiration. Nashville was buzzing with my story, and my parents knew it. Their response was swift and vicious. Edward and Linda called me repeatedly, their voices alternating between pleading and raging. Edward shouted into the phone one night, "You have destroyed this family's name. Do you understand what you've done?" His words made my hands tremble, but not from guilt, from anger. I hung up and blocked the number. My mother tried a different tactic, leaving voicemails filled with sobs. "Rachel, you are tearing us apart. We only wanted to save your sister. How can you betray us like this?" Listening to her, I almost felt the old guilt seeping back in. Almost. But then I touched the scar on my side and remembered the hospital bed, the taste of betrayal, and the guilt dissolved into steel. Clara, too, joined their campaign. She posted on social media about her suffering, about how her ungrateful sister was trying to ruin her life. Comments flooded in, some sympathetic to her, others condemning her. She wrote one message directly to me, tagging me publicly. "You will never understand sacrifice because you are too selfish to know what love is." Reading those words, I felt both fury and clarity. Clara was not just complicit, she was proud. Patricia anticipated their moves. She warned me that their lawyer would paint me as unstable, that they would try to twist the narrative into a story of a troubled daughter attacking her poor, desperate parents. She prepared me with counter-arguments, with timelines, with documented evidence. Every forged signature, every witness statement, every voicemail was carefully cataloged. "When they come after you," she said, "you will be ready." The first pretrial hearing was a battlefield in miniature. My parents entered the courtroom dressed in somber colors, their faces masks of grief. Edward walked tall, exuding false dignity. Linda clutched Clara's arm as though she were guiding a fragile saint. Reporters lined the benches, their pens scratching furiously. When the judge called the case, Patricia stood with calm confidence presenting the forged consent forms. The judge's eyes narrowed as she examined the shaky handwriting, the notary's questionable stamp. "This will require further review," she said, her tone icy. I caught the flicker of panic in my father's eyes, and for the first time I felt the balance tilt ever so slightly. Outside the courthouse, microphones were thrust in my face. Reporters asked how I felt, whether I hated my family, whether I feared the trial. I swallowed hard and said the truth. "I do not hate them. I hate what they did. This is not about vengeance. This is about justice." My voice shook at first, but steadied as I continued. "No one should ever be forced to give up part of their body. No one should ever be treated as less than human by their own family." Cameras flashed. My words went out into the world. That night, my parents called me a traitor. My father's voice thundered through the phone before I hung up. "You are dead to us, Rachel." My mother whispered, "Do not come crawling back when you are alone." Their words stung, but they also freed me. They had already buried me in their hearts long ago. Now I was burying the control they had over me. The community split in its reaction. Some sided with my parents, calling me cold, accusing me of dragging private family matters into the public eye. But many others reached out in quiet solidarity. Women stopped me on the street to whisper that they admired my courage. Men wrote letters to the editor defending my right to control my own body. Even strangers sent emails thanking me for speaking out. I was no longer just Rachel Morgan. I had become a symbol of resistance. Still, the pressure mounted. One evening, Evelyn found a letter slipped under the door. It was scrawled in my father's unmistakable handwriting. "Drop this case or we will bury you in court." Evelyn's face hardened as she read it aloud. "This is intimidation," she said. "We will show Patricia." The next day, the letter was added to the growing pile of evidence. Patricia remained steady. She reminded me that my parents' desperation was proof of their guilt. They would lash out because they had no other weapon. "You must not bend," she urged. "Every time they try to scare you, they show the world who they truly are." Through it all, Evelyn never left my side. She was my anchor when the waves of doubt threatened to pull me under. One night, as we sat on her porch watching fireflies dance in the dark, she said softly, "You have already won something, Rachel. You broke the silence. That alone is victory." Her words brought tears to my eyes. She was right. Silence had been my prison. Speaking had shattered it. As the trial date drew closer, the city's interest grew. Reporters speculated, lawyers debated on television, and my parents' polished image began to crack. Neighbors whispered about the shouting they had heard about the strange comings and goings on the night of the surgery. Some even admitted they had suspected something was wrong long before. The facade was crumbling, and all that remained was the truth waiting to be revealed. I knew the hardest battles were still ahead. The courtroom would be brutal. My parents would twist and lie, Clara would play the victim, and I would be forced to relive every wound in public. But I was no longer the girl cowering in the basement or the woman numbed into silence. I was Rachel Morgan's survivor teacher, daughter of betrayal, and seeker of justice. The fight had only begun, but I was ready. The morning of the trial felt like standing at the edge of a cliff. I woke before dawn in Evelyn's guest room, staring at the pale ceiling as the hum of cicadas bled through the thin window panes. My scar throbbed faintly as though reminding me why I was about to walk into battle. I dressed slowly, choosing a simple navy dress and a cardigan. Nothing flashy, nothing weak. When I looked in the mirror, I saw not just the tired eyes of a woman who had survived betrayal, but a steady fire that had not been there before. Evelyn brewed coffee in the kitchen, the rich scent filling the air. She handed me a steaming mug, her eyes catching mine. "You're ready, Rachel. They don't own you anymore." I knotted my throat tight and sipped. The warmth steadied me. By the time Patricia arrived to drive us downtown, I felt my nerves sharpen into resolve. The courthouse loomed, its stone columns casting long shadows across the pavement. A crowd had already gathered, reporters, photographers, curious citizens drawn by the spectacle of a daughter accusing her parents of theft and betrayal. As Patricia guided me through the throng, flashes burst like tiny explosions, questions flying at me from all directions. "Did your parents really drug you? How do you feel facing them today? Do you still love your family?" I kept my eyes forward, clutching the strap of my bag. My answer would come inside, not on the courthouse steps. Inside, the air was heavy with the hum of voices. The gallery was packed, every bench filled with strangers hungry for drama, neighbors whispering, and a few supporters holding back tears. At the front sat the judge, a stern woman with silver hair pulled into a bun, her expression carved in granite. She had seen countless families tear themselves apart in this courtroom, but even she seemed unsettled by the weight of this case. When the bailiff called our names, my parents entered. Edward strode in first, wearing a pressed suit, his jaw set in grim determination. Linda followed, draped in somber gray, clutching a tissue she dabbed at eyes that were dry. Clara leaned on her arm, pale, fragile, her hair tied back her face, arranged into the picture of innocence. The room shifted, sympathetic murmurs rising at the sight of her. I felt my stomach twist, but Patricia leaned close. "Let them act. Evidence will strip the mask." The opening statement set the stage. Patricia spoke first, her voice clear, deliberate, cutting through the air like a bow across strings. She told the court about me, about my refusal to donate, about the night of the wine, about waking up in a hospital with a piece of myself gone. She held up photographs of the forged consent form, highlighting the shaky imitation of my signature, the notary connection to my father. Every word carved deeper into the silence, until the room seemed to hold its breath. Then came their attorney, a man with slicked hair and a rehearsed smile. He painted my parents as desperate caregivers, loving parents who had watched one daughter waste away while another turned cold and selfish. He spoke of family duty, of sacrifice, of the supposed instability that had plagued me since childhood. When he gestured toward Clara, her eyes brimmed with tears on cue, a single drop sliding down her cheek. Gasps rippled through the audience. My jaw clenched. Patricia scribbled something on her legal pad. "Stay steady." "Truth will win." The witnesses began. A nurse testified about the night of the surgery. She admitted she had assumed the paperwork was valid, though she never once saw me sign it. The judge's eyes narrowed. "A neighbor." Mrs. Thompson took the stand and recounted hearing my father's voice one evening. "She will drink it. She will not resist." Murmurs spread through the courtroom, heads turning toward my parents. Edward's face darkened, his jaw grinding. Then it was my turn. I walked slowly to the stand, each step echoing like a drum beat. My palms were damp, my scar pulling beneath my dress. I raised my hand, swore the oath, and sat. Patricia guided me through the testimony, her questions steady. I told the court about the years of favoritism, the pressure to give the threats the night of the wine. I described waking in the hospital, the searing pain, the words my parents spoke as if I were a vessel, not a person. My voice trembled at first, but as I spoke, the tremor smoothed into steel. I looked at the jury, their eyes fixed on me, and I told them plainly I said no. They ignored my no. They took anyway. When Patricia finished, the defense pounced. Their lawyer leaned forward, voice dripping with mock sympathy. Ms. Morgan, isn't it true you have always felt overshadowed by your sister? Isn't it true you were jealous of the attention she received? I met his gaze, my spine straight. Jealousy does not give anyone the right to steal my body. His jaw tightened. He pressed harder, suggesting I had consented, but regretted it that I was now using the court to punish my parents. My anger flared. I pointed to my scar. Does this look like regret, or does it look like theft? The room erupted in whispers. Then came the moment that shattered their performance. Evelyn was called as a witness. She described visiting me in the hospital, hearing my words through gasps of pain, the horror in my eyes. She also testified about the letter slipped under her door, my father's handwriting, threatening to bury me in court if I didn't drop the case. Patricia handed the letter to the judge, who examined it with cool detachment before passing it to the jury. Edward shifted in his seat, sweat beading at his temple. The tension snapped when my father lost control. During cross-examination, Patricia pressed him on the forged consent form, asking if he had pressured the notary into stamping it. His face turned red, his voice rising. She was ungrateful. She had no right to refuse. We did what was necessary. The words echoed like a gunshot in the hushed courtroom. Gasps filled the gallery. Linda reached for his arm, whispering frantically, but he shook her off, his fury spilling over. You don't understand. Clara deserved to live. Rachel was always the useless one. The judge slammed her gavel, demanding order, but the damage was done. The mask had shattered. The jury had seen the rage beneath the polish, the entitlement that had driven them. Linda took the stand next, her tissue pressed to her lips, her voice trembling. She spoke of love, of sacrifice, of her desperation to save Clara. But when Patricia asked if she ever considered my right to say no, Linda faltered. Her lips parted, but no words came. The silence stretched until it became unbearable. Finally, she whispered, We did what we had to. Clara was the last. She walked slowly to the stand, leaning on the railing, her fragile appearance stirring murmurs of sympathy. She spoke of her illness, of her fear of dying, of her gratitude for the transplant. But when Patricia asked if she ever thanked me, if she ever recognized that my choice was stolen, her expression hardened. She looked at me with eyes sharp as knives. You should have given it willingly. You owe me your life. The courtroom froze. Even the defense attorney paled. By the time the testimonies ended, the air was electric. The audience had witnessed not just evidence, but the unveiling of truth. My parents and sister, once cloaked in sympathy, had revealed themselves as entitled, unrepentant, willing to destroy me for Clara's sake. In closing arguments, Patricia's voice rang with conviction. She reminded the jury that this case was not about a sick sister or desperate parents. It was about consent, about a woman's right to her own body, about the theft of autonomy so profound it left scars that would never fade. The defense tried to salvage dignity, pleading for understanding, but the words fell flat in the shadow of their outbursts. As the judge called for recess before deliberation, I sat back in my seat, trembling with exhaustion. My parents glared at me across the aisle, their faces twisted with fury and fear. Clara looked away, her lips pressed tight. I touched my scar again, feeling its rough edge beneath my dress, and whispered to myself, They will not win. Not this time. The jury filed back into the courtroom after hours of deliberation, their faces solemn, their footsteps echoing against the polished wood floors. My chest tightened with every second. I sat between Patricia and Evelyn, my hands gripping the edge of the bench so hard my knuckles ached. Across the aisle, my parents straightened in their seats, Clara clutching her mother's hand. Edward trying to look calm, but betraying himself with the twitch of his jaw. The gallery hushed, the air heavy with anticipation. The foreperson handed the verdict slip to the bailiff, who carried it to the judge. Judge Whitaker unfolded the paper slowly, her expression unreadable. My heart pounded so loudly I could barely hear her speak. In the case of Rachel Morgan versus Edward and Linda Morgan, the jury finds the defendants guilty of medical assault fraud and violation of bodily autonomy. The words struck like thunder. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters scribbled furiously, cameras clicked. I exhaled a breath I had been holding for months, tears blurring my vision. Patricia's hand squeezed mine, grounding me as the judge continued. She turned her gaze to my parents, her voice sharp as steel. This court recognizes the severity of your crimes. You violated the most fundamental rights of your daughter. You ignored her consent-forged documents and subjected her to a surgery that stripped her of choice and dignity. Such acts are not only immoral, but criminal. Edward shifted his face, a storm of rage and disbelief. He muttered under his breath, shaking his head, but the gavel cracked sharply. Silence. Linda's lips trembled, her tissue pressed tightly against her mouth, but no tears fell. Clara stared at the floor, her earlier bravado gone, her face pale and tight. The judge announced the sentence. Edward Morgan, you are hereby sentenced to 12 years in state prison for assault and fraud. Linda Morgan, you are sentenced to 8 years for complicity and fraud. Both sentences are to be carried out immediately. The bailiffs moved forward, their uniforms crisp, their hands steady. The sight of my father's wrists being cuffed should have filled me with triumph, but what I felt was deeper, heavier. It was justice, yes, but also the ache of finality. Edward snarled as the cuffs clicked shut, his voice rising. This is madness. She is our daughter. We did what had to be done. He twisted to face me, his eyes burning. You will regret this, Rachel. You will regret destroying your family. I met his gaze steadily, my voice calm, clear. No, Father, I regret nothing. You destroyed this family long before I ever spoke. Linda's shoulders sagged as the cuffs closed around her wrists. She whispered, barely audible, Rachel, we did it for Clara, for love. Her words rang hollow, echoing in the vast silence of the courtroom. I shook my head. Love does not drug your child. Love does not steal. The judge's voice cut through the moment. Court is adjourned. Her gavel fell with a sound that reverberated like the closing of a door on the years of silence, fear, and betrayal. The gallery erupted. Some clapped softly, others whispered furiously. Reporters rushed forward, shoving microphones, asking me how I felt. Patricia shielded me, her arm firm. No comment today, she told them, guiding me toward the exit. Evelyn stayed close, her presence steady. Yet as we walked through the throng, I felt the weight lift from my shoulders, a heaviness dissolving into air. Justice had been spoken, and the world had heard. Outside the courthouse, the sun had broken through the clouds. The light was blinding after hours inside, almost symbolic, as though the sky itself had chosen this moment to clear. I stopped on the steps, breathing deeply, tasting freedom. For the first time in years, I felt whole, not because my body was intact, but because my voice had been restored. In the weeks that followed, the aftermath unfolded like ripples spreading across a pond. The community buzzed with the news. Some neighbors admitted they had always suspected something was wrong in the Morgan household. Others expressed shock, unwilling to reconcile the respectable facade with the crimes revealed. My parents' names became synonymous with betrayal and cruelty. Edward, once respected in his field, was condemned as a cautionary tale of power abused. Linda, who had played the role of the dutiful mother, was whispered about with disdain. Clara faced her own reckoning. Though she was not charged with the crimes directly, the testimony of her entitlement, her words on the stand were enough to tarnish her image. Friends distanced themselves. Supporters withdrew. She walked through town with eyes lowered, whispers following like shadows. The transplant had saved her body, but it had cost her everything else. For me, the days were a mixture of exhaustion and healing. I attended follow-up medical appointments, each reminder of my scar, a reminder of resilience. I worked with Patricia to finalize civil suits that would ensure financial restitution, though no amount of money could restore what had been taken. Evelyn remained by my side, her laughter and warmth filling the empty spaces left by loss. At night, I wrote in my journal, documenting not just pain, but growth, not just betrayal, but rebirth. One evening, I returned to the community center. The piano sat waiting in the corner, its keys gleaming softly. I sat down, fingers trembling, and began to play. The notes were hesitant at first, then stronger, rising into the air like a voice freed. Children gathered at the doorway, listening, their faces wide-eyed. For the first time since the surgery, I felt the music flow through me again, unbroken, unbowed. When I finished, Evelyn clapped softly. That, she said, is what survival sounds like. Justice had not erased the past, but it had rewritten my future. My parents, once the authors of my silence, were now characters in a story of their own downfall. The courtroom had stripped away their masks, exposing their greed and cruelty to the world. And I, the daughter they had deemed worthless, had stood and spoken until justice made them kneel. In the weeks following the sentencing, my world shifted into something new and unfamiliar. The silence that had once suffocated me was gone, replaced by a steady hum of support, curiosity, and even controversy. Everywhere I went, people seemed to know my name. Some whispered when I passed, others offered small nods of respect, and a few even stopped me outright to say they admired my courage. For someone who had grown up invisible in her own home, the sudden spotlight felt overwhelming, but also strangely affirming. For the first time in my life, people saw me not as Clara's shadow, not as Edward and Linda's daughter, but as Rachel Morgan's survivor fighter and truth teller. My parents were taken into custody the same day the judge's gavel fell. News outlets covered their transfer to prison, cameras flashing as Edward shouted about injustice, Linda weeping into her sleeve. Their lawyer tried to maintain dignity, but the headlines wrote themselves, "Parents who stole daughter's kidney sentenced to prison." The once respected Morgans became the subject of disgust, their names tied to betrayal and cruelty. Neighbors who had once praised Edward's work ethic or Linda's hospitality now avoided mentioning them at all. Their reputations built over decades crumbled in days. Clara, too, bore the weight of exposure. Though she had not been sentenced, her testimony had destroyed the image she carefully cultivated. Her words on the stand. "You owe me your life" were replayed on news clips, dissected on social media, condemned in community forums. Friends distanced themselves, invitations dried up, and whispers followed her everywhere. The transplant had saved her physically, but she carried the stigma of entitlement that no surgery could remove. She tried to reach out once, leaving a shaky voicemail. "I just want to talk. Please." But I deleted it without listening further. The time for conversation had passed. For me, healing became both a physical and emotional journey. Each morning I woke with a dull ache in my side, a reminder of the night they took what was not theirs. But alongside the pain came resilience. I began walking longer distances, building strength slowly, step by step. Evelyn encouraged me sometimes, walking beside me, sometimes cheering me on from the porch. Every small milestone felt like a victory, not just over weakness, but over the voices that had once told me I was lesser. Patricia helped me finalize the civil suit. The court awarded damages for the trauma, the surgery, the fraud. Money could not replace what was lost, but it gave me options. With part of the settlement, I founded the Morgan Foundation not to honor my family, but to transform their cruelty into something that might protect others. The foundation offered legal and financial support to women facing coercion in medical and family matters. Letters poured in from across the country, stories of women pressured, silenced, betrayed. For each one, I wrote back with words of solidarity. "You are not alone. Your voice matters." Returning to teaching was harder than I expected. At first, I worried the children would stare at my scar, that parents would hesitate to leave their kids with someone whose life had been splashed across headlines. But when I walked into the community center again, I was greeted with cheers, small hands reaching for mine, bright eyes filled with excitement. They didn't care about the past. They cared about the music, the joy of pressing keys and making sound. Sitting at the piano, I felt whole again. Music poured from me not as escape, but as declaration. I was here. I had survived. One afternoon after class, a mother lingered behind. She thanked me quietly, her eyes brimming with tears. She told me she had watched my trial on television, that she too had grown up under a father who demanded everything, who stole her choices. She said seeing me fight gave her courage to confront her own past. I hugged her tightly, realizing in that moment that my story had become more than mine. It had become a light for others stumbling through their own darkness. Evelyn remained my anchor. We spent evenings on her porch, sipping tea, watching the sky fade into night. She never pushed me to move faster than I could, never judged me for the days when the nightmares returned. When I woke, shaking, remembering the bitter taste of drugged wine or the sterile burn of the hospital lights, she was there, reminding me that I was safe, that those days were behind me. Slowly, the nightmares lessened. Months later, I attended a public forum on medical ethics. I was asked to speak about my experience. Standing at the podium facing a room full of strangers, I felt the same nerves that had once choked me in the courtroom. But when I began to speak, my voice found its rhythm. I told them about the betrayal, the theft, the scar that would never fade. I told them about the importance of consent, of choice of autonomy. When I finished, the applause was thunderous. People lined up to thank me, to share their own stories, to say that my words mattered. I realized then that my pain had been transformed into purpose. Meanwhile, life for my parents unraveled completely. Edward struggled in prison, his temper earning him few allies. Linda retreated into silence, her role as the dutiful mother stripped away. Letters arrived occasionally filled with justifications, pleas, even apologies. I never responded. They had wanted me silent all my life. Now it was their turn to sit in silence. Clara moved out of town eventually, seeking a fresh start. Rumors trickled back of her loneliness, of her difficulty finding work, of her bitterness. Part of me pitied her, but pity did not erase the memory of her words, the gleam in her eyes as she claimed I owed her my life. She had been as much a part of the theft as our parents, even if she never held the bottle herself. As time passed, I found a rhythm of peace. My days were filled with music, with children's laughter, with the quiet work of the foundation. My evenings belonged to myself, to books, to writing, to Evelyn's steady companionship. I learned to breathe without waiting for the next blow to sleep, without bracing for the next betrayal. I was free in a way I had never imagined as a child in the basement. On the anniversary of the verdict, I returned to the courthouse steps. The sun was bright, the sky clear. I stood there for a long moment, remembering the fear, the whispers, the weight of the world pressing down. And then I remembered the sound of the gavel, the words of the judge, the moment my parents' power dissolved. I touched the scar on my side and whispered to myself, "They took part of me, but I took back my life." That was the lesson I carried forward. Pain does not define us. Betrayal does not break us. What defines us is what we do after how we rise, how we reclaim the voice they tried to silence. For me, justice was not just about prison sentences or verdicts. It was about transformation. It was about turning scars into strength, silence into music, and loss into a future filled with light. If you've made it this far into my story, thank you. It means more than I can ever say that you stayed with me through every scar, every betrayal, and every small victory. Telling this story was not easy. Reliving the details still makes my chest tighten and my hands shake. But I knew from the beginning that silence was the weapon my parents used against me, and silence is what I had to break if I ever wanted to truly heal. Now I want to turn the focus outward, to you. If you are listening, I want you to know something important: your voice matters. Maybe you've never been in a courtroom like me, maybe you've never faced betrayal this extreme, but we all know what it's like to feel unseen, unheard, or dismissed by the very people who should have protected us. That pain is real, that silence is heavy, and I want you to know you are not alone in it. When I first decided to fight back, I was terrified. I thought no one would believe me. I thought the world would look at me as a bitter daughter or an ungrateful sister, and for a while that's exactly what some people said. But then I learned that courage doesn't mean waiting until everyone is on your side. Courage means speaking even when your voice trembles, even when the room is full of people waiting to doubt you. And in the end, the truth has a way of cutting through the noise. So here is my question for you, the one I want you to sit with after this video ends. Have you ever been told to stay silent, to accept something that wasn't right, just to keep the peace in your family, your workplace, or your community? Did you stay silent, or did you find a way to stand up? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one, and I can tell you the comment section of this channel has become a place of healing and solidarity for so many people. When you share, you're not just typing words, you're reaching someone else out there who needs to know they aren't alone. If you're watching this from somewhere in the United States or anywhere in the world, let me know where you're listening from. I'm always humbled when I see comments from people in Tennessee, California, Texas, New York, and even as far away as Australia or the UK. It reminds me that stories of survival and justice connect us across oceans and cultures. Pain speaks a universal language, but so does courage. And if you've ever felt like family has treated you as less, I want you to say 3 simple words in the comments I matter too. Those 3 words are small, but they are powerful. They're a declaration. They're a reminder that no matter who tries to diminish you, your worth is not up for debate. I also want to invite you to think about the idea of justice. In my story, justice came in the form of a courtroom, a verdict, and a prison sentence. But justice doesn't always look like that. Sometimes justice is walking away from toxic people and choosing peace. Sometimes justice is setting boundaries and not backing down. Sometimes justice is simply saying no when everyone expects you to say yes. So tell me, what does justice look like in your life? Share it in the comments. Now, before we close, I want to say this directly. If you are facing abuse, coercion, or betrayal from people in your life, I need you to hear me clearly. You do not deserve it. You are not weak for wanting to get out. You are not selfish for protecting yourself. And you are not alone. There are hotlines, support groups, friends, and even strangers on the internet who will stand with you when family will not. Reach out. Speak out. Do not let silence become your cage. This channel exists for stories like this. Stories that cut deep, stories that hurt, but also stories that show the possibility of healing. If you found strength in what you heard today, if it stirred something in you, I want you to hit that like button so YouTube knows stories like these matter. Subscribe if you haven't already, because I promise there are more stories coming, stories that will make your heart pound, your eyes tear up, and your spirit rise. And if you know someone who needs to hear this, someone stuck in a toxic family, someone struggling with betrayal, someone who feels unseen, share this video with them. You never know how much one story can change the course of another person's life. I'll leave you with this thought. They took my kidney, but they didn't take my will to fight. They stole from me, but I built something new in its place. The scar on my body will always be there, but so will the strength that came from surviving it. And that, my friends, is what justice truly is, not erasing the pain, but transforming it into power. So tell me, what is the scar you carry and how will you transform it? Drop it in the comments below. And remember, no matter what they told you, no matter how they tried to silence you, your story matters. You matter. Thank you for listening. Thank you for standing with me. And thank you for being part of a community that believes in truth, resilience, and the power of voice. Until next time, take care of yourselves, take care of each other, and never forget you are stronger than they want you to believe.